Through Yozora and Kingdom Hearts 3, finally, after all of these years, Tetsuya Nomura is going to be able to reinvigorate his ideas that he once had for Final Fantasy Versus XIII, a game that was seemingly stuck in development hell, announced back in 2006, and got a title change in 2013 to Final Fantasy XV. Sometime after 2013, unfortunately Tetsuya Nomura stepped down from director and Hajime Tabata stepped in. Similar to the case of Kingdom Hearts 3, Final Fantasy Versus XIII ended up facing an engine change from the Universal engine to that of Square Enix's own in-house engine created during the time, known as the Luminos engine. It was pretty clear over the years that Tetsuya Nomura was absolutely fond of Final Fantasy Versus XIII and the new characters that he got to create for this game, specifically when we look towards Noctis. In an interview in 2013, it was explained at the Japan Expo by Tetsuya Nomura that Noctis is in fact one of his favorite characters that he's ever created, alongside that of Sora. Mentioning, do you know the name Sora means the sky in Japanese, and Noctis, his family name is Kalem, which means sky as well, so basically Noctis means night sky, so they are kind of complete opposites to each other. There is a reason why I named these characters as opposites. Noctis is kind of like my latest boy, or latest son. There are a ton of interviews with Tetsuya Nomura spanning from the time of 2006 to 2013 talking about Versus XIII. And you can tell within these numerous interviews how much passion and love this man had for this project. Versus XIII during the time really caught my eye, mainly because of the fact that it was being developed by the Kingdom Hearts team, and of course directed by Tetsuya Nomura. A lot of ideas, specifically towards the gameplay that is found within Kingdom Hearts, was going to be implemented into Final Fantasy. This would be one of the very first blockbuster Final Fantasy games to actually feature action RPG combat, using a similar format to that of what is found in Kingdom Hearts, even with the command menu and all. I don't think Tetsuya Nomura has really ever been able to let go of the idea and concepts that he had for Versus XIII. The version that we got of this game through Final Fantasy XV, and with now Hajime Tabata being director, was certainly familiar and similar in areas, but wasn't the original vision that Tetsuya Nomura had in mind. Now, this is quite a controversial subject. A lot of people at the time were kind of getting fed up with how long the development of Versus XIII was taking. I mean, this project finally ended up releasing in 2016. It took 10 years for this game to come out. That's a long time. But an engine change as well as a vision change with the original director stepping down is going to cause issues like this. I for one personally loved Final Fantasy XV. It really is one of my all-time favorite Final Fantasy games, as I do tend to struggle with turn-based holding my attention. But there's a bit of a divide when it comes to this game. One half are on board with 15 and the version that we have today, but the other half absolutely despise this current version and are on board wanting that Versus XIII that was originally visioned by Tetsuya Nomura. I don't think it's any surprise now that we're looking at Kingdom Hearts, and we're currently in a timeline where it seems as if Nomura is putting through a lot of the inspiration, concepts, and ideas that he once had for Versus XIII into his star child, the series that means absolutely all to him, Kingdom Hearts. It was sort of made apparent to us within Kingdom Hearts 3 before the Remind DLC came out that specifically when we look towards Yozora and the secret ending with the Verum Rex ad that appeared in Toy Box, that yeah, some of these Versus XIII ideas are starting to shine through into Kingdom Hearts. Yozora literally seems like a recreation or different version of that of Noctis. Down to the details of Noctis's whole entire appearance, from his physical appearance to that of the clothes that he's wearing. Even his weapon itself resembles that of an engine blade, just something a little more futuristic looking. Even furthermore, the Japanese meaning behind Yozora literally means night sky, into similar fashion of the meaning behind the name Noctis Kylum. Now once the Kingdom Hearts 3 Remind DLC dropped and players were able to experience the secret episode where we fight against Yozora, During its good ending, there was even further evidence showing players that Tetsuya Nomura is finally able to infuse some of the DNA that was once there for Versus XIII into Kingdom Hearts with this specific cutscene. We see a scene of Yuzora sitting in the back seat of a car looking out a window. This is literally a one-to-one recreation of the exact same scene that happens in a Versus XIII trailer, with Noctis sitting in the regalia. The characters are in the exact same position, the choreography is the exact same, and even down to the point of the literal car interior looking the same. I think this was the absolute confirmation point that Versus XIII will be infused into Kingdom Hearts. What is interesting is, of course, everyone started to freak out once they experienced this, and an interview with Tetsuya Nomura followed some time after, talking about everything to do with the secret episode in Kingdom Hearts 3 Remind. One of the questions asked was about Versus XIII and if it is actually starting to be infused into Kingdom Hearts. Nomura gave this answer of, "Only I know the full story behind Versus XIII and Verum Rex. However, the two are completely different, and I think an unexpected development is occurring." Now, this is a weird answer because, for one, yeah, I would believe this man. They are completely different. Well, maybe not completely different, but they are certainly different. I don't believe that the story that we are going to get coming forward through Kingdom Hearts 4, as well as this brand new arc that we're about to experience, is going to be the story that was going to be displayed in Versus XIII. No. Simply not at all. This is still Kingdom Hearts after all. We've got the Lost Masters going on. There's Disney that's going to pop up. But the original ideas that Nomura once had for Versus XIII are without a doubt going to be sprinkled throughout this next upcoming Kingdom Hearts arc. I think a lot of the character of Yuzora will have his own identity, but one half will certainly shine through with the original version that Nomura had for Noctis. I believe this is what Nomura is referring to when he mentions that there is an interesting development occurring. This recent Kingdom Hearts 4 trailer really, to me, screams absolute Versus XIII. Tetsuya Nomura recently mentions that he actually prefers fantasy reality rather than too much fantasy, so a fantasy that is based on reality, which was the original vision for Final Fantasy Versus XIII, also continuing through for Final Fantasy XV. It is a world that takes cues and keys from real life as we know it, but infuses fantasy into its mix. Now, if we look at this whole idea of Quadratum, it is Sora literally entering the real world. Kingdom Hearts has plenty of fantasy elements intertwined, but bringing Sora to a point where he is now literally in the real world is Tetsuya Nomura finally being able to execute that idea of fantasy based on reality. And the trailer itself just really, to me, screams Versus XIII. I was getting like mad flashbacks of seeing some of those gameplay trailers of Versus XIII back in the day with Noctis in the street fighting against the behemoth. That scene of Sora in the ripped up building sliding through it in mid-air really just reminded me of like the Altissia gameplay that we saw for Versus XIII, with some of the buildings all being ripped up by like the Leviathan, him rolling through those buildings while they're all being destroyed. Like, it's just insane. Like, even the way that Sora summons the Kingdom Key in the streets is so reminiscent of how Noctis summons forth his weapons, like the Engine Blade. This is something that he has wanted to do for such a long time, and now he's finally able to complete this mission via the use of Kingdom Hearts. Now, I know that actually a lot of people are currently worried about this, and there's been a lot of comments made towards the art style of Kingdom Hearts looking absolutely way too realistic, looking basically like a Final Fantasy game. Because yes, it does. It really does look like a modern day Final Fantasy game. There is of course an explanation behind this, but the direction that Tetsuya Nomura has pushed Kingdom Hearts in is obviously very intentional, I believe, for the ideas that he once had for Versus XIII. I don't think that Kingdom Hearts is going to face a complete identity loss, keeping in mind Disney is still prevalent in Kingdom Hearts 4. It seems like we are going to be getting stuff like Star Wars, which is interesting interesting. That is definitely new territory for Kingdom Hearts. But we will also still have the inclusion of all of those prominent Disney characters. Donald, Goofy, Mickey. Likely it will be a setup where we are cutting back to the OG universe, reality as it's called, with all of those Disney characters, seeing exactly the events that are transpiring with them. There are some interesting quotes that appear throughout the various different Versus XIII trailers, like the true figure is still hidden in sleep, a meeting predestined by the divine, an act of love by the last king, eyes that see the light of expiring souls. Now these quotes obviously refer to the story that was going to be presented in Versus XIII, and strongly believe that these ideas are going to be infused. Eyes that see the light of expiring souls, that to me just like absolutely, I don't know, for some reason screams Yozora being able to have that interaction with Sora in the final world. Technically, Sora is an expiring soul. He is dead, but is somehow still alive, as he still serves a purpose. A meeting predestined by the divine. Man, again, that just screams Sora to Yozora. The true figure is still hidden in their sleep. My god, Yozora's actual true appearance. An act of love by the last king. If we look at the information on the back of the Verum Rex box art that is within Kingdom Hearts 3, it kind of gives us maybe a little bit of information towards Yozora and possibly even Quadratum. This is what some of the blurbs read. That's the story of the King of Truth. Oh my god, and then Reclaim Your Heart, a slogan for Final Fantasy Versus XIII and XV is Reclaim Your Throne. Obviously Noctis was the one true king and had to return to Insomnia to reclaim his throne. I mean, these are like one-to-ones and connections to that of Versus XIII. It's ridiculous. I think what's going to be really interesting about this next arc, or specifically Kingdom Hearts 4, is we just will not know how many of the ideas that Nomura once had for Versus XIII will actually be infused into this. The only stuff we know is what we saw through those trailers, and there's not really too much to go off. There is a lot of footage here and a lot of gameplay, but in the sense of actual context towards story, it's pretty minimal. I personally believe that Nomura will probably refrain from ever explaining more to do with Versus XIII's original vision, just because I do feel like a lot of it will be infused into Kingdom Hearts. I do feel though that there will be a point sometime after Kingdom Hearts 4, or later on down the track with this new Kingdom Hearts arc, where hopefully Tetsuya Nomura will actually front up and actually say, yeah, some of these remnants of ideas that I once had for Versus XIII are here in Kingdom Hearts. And, you know, that scene with Yozora in the car, I think, is a screaming point of, hey guys, we are bringing Versus XIII back in essence, in a strange, weird way. They did that intentionally. They knew what they were doing. However guys, that is all for today. Just some stuff that I wanted to talk about because that recent Kingdom Hearts 4 trailer just screams Versus XIII to me even furthermore. And to be honest, I'm really, really happy that Tetsuya Nomura is finally getting a chance to execute these ideas, but through his child, his loved child, Kingdom Hearts. However guys, let me know your thoughts and opinions in the comment section down below. Hopefully you're having a fantastic day, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace.